In this video, we'll start working on a shopping app project. In particular, this will be a wine app. So we'll focus mainly on the front-end work, the mobile aspect using React Native and Expo, installing any packages that we will need along the way. We will work on onboarding screens for the app. So these are the initial screens that the user will see when the app is installed for the first time. So for this app, we'll be having 3 screens in total. The user can choose to skip this using the button that we'll provide over here. Otherwise, they can go through everything and then have access to the app using the Explore button. This is our home screen. It has 3 sections that we'll be working on. The first section is a list of current deals. We also have the popular items, and also our full collection can be found here. Clicking on any of the carts will review the details. On the details page, we can add the item to our cart, or we can add it to our wish list. The quantity added to the cart too can be updated as well. Back on the home page, we can view all the contents belonging to a particular section. So for instance, we can view the popular here, which will give us the list of all popular items. And also we can do the same for our collection, viewing all the items in our collection. On the search tab, we can search for a particular item that we want. So once we activate the search, we can start typing and the product will pop up, like so. If we don't have any product matching as well, we'll get a message for that. For the cart section, it will display the items that we've added to the cart. We can remove the item from the cart or increase the quantities for each item. The counter is an input as well, so we can select it and enter the quantity that we want. And we see that it auto corrects because the limits that we've set for this particular item is just 15. You can use the button here to clear all the items in the cart, and this will bring up a confirmation pop-up for us to proceed. The confirmation modal will also be reused during checkout so that we can continue with our checkout and then we will get a confirmation message like so. On the profile section, we have the details of the user account and also we have our wish list. Visiting the item, we can remove it from the wish list, and when we go back, the item is no more, and then we have our empty wish list. In the final parts, we'll work on a simple icon for the app. So this will be the icon that we'll be working on for the app. Also, we'll work on a simple splash screen for the app, which we can see by reloading. We chose this design because we tried to mimic the home page of the app. So the splash screen was just a trace of the home page that we have here. Now that we know what is to be expected, let's set up the app. To begin, we'll create a new Expo project. So we go to the directory that we want to create the project, and we'll use nps create Expo app, and we'll call this wine app. And then using the template flag, we'll pass blank. So we want to create a new blank Expo project. It will download all the required files and set up our project for us. Once the project is ready like so, we can open it in the code editor. In the same directory, we change into our project. And then we can open it in VS Code using code. In our code editor, we can bring up the terminal. And then we can start our project over here. So use nps expo start to start the project. I can then run this on my device using any of the commands here. In my case, I'll be using the A command. And I will open it on the Android device I have over here. With the app running, we are good to go. So we can reduce the size of the terminal till we need it again. Now in the files and directories for the project, we'll add a new directory. This we'll call config. And in this directory, the first file we'll add will be called theme. In this file, we want to define a set of colors that will be used throughout the project. so that we just refer to this theme file whenever we need to use some colors. So for this, we'll export an object, and this object will be called colors. For the project, I've defined some colors over here already, so I'll copy and paste them here. So these are all the colors that we'll be using in the project. You can pause the video and define all the colors, or you can define your own colors. I'll also make these files accessible using a link in the description below. Still under the config, we'll add another file, and this will be called constants. Now in this file, we'll be defining some important values that we'll need while working on the project. So for this, we'll first have to make some imports. So we bring in the platform module from React Native like so. And also we'll bring in dimension from React Native. Starting with the current OS that we are on, we want to define a value for that. So that will be for the current OS. And this we'll call on iOS. And this value will be true if platform.os equals iOS. And we need to export this value so that we have access to it. Next, we want to know the dimensions of the screen of the mobile device that is being used to access the app. So that one will be screen dimensions. The first one will be the screen width. So as usual, we export it. So for this, we'll use the dimensions model, and we'll use the get function, and we'll pass screen. Then we'll access the .width property. And we'll do something very similar for the screen height. So we can copy and paste this. Then we update this to the screen height. And then over here, instead of width, we access the height property. Like so. So these are the constants that we'll be working with. Now at this point, let's install some of the packages that we'll be using in the app setup. We'll install a few of them, and then we'll import them when they are needed. So we'll bring up our terminal here, and then we'll cancel the project using Ctrl+C. The first package we want to install is async storage. We'll be storing data and retrieving data in the app. So in the async storage documentation, we can get a command to install async storage. So it's nps expo install react native async storage /async storage. So we can copy the command here and paste it on our command line. I'll put the link to the documentation in the description as well. Next up, we install expo splash screen. This will give us control over the splash screen, so we can decide when to hide or show it. So over here, we can copy the command as well. Then back on the terminal, we install it. Next, for the navigation of this project that is moving from one screen to the other, we're making use of React Navigation Native. So we need to install some basic packages for now. So first of all, we need to install React Navigation Native. So we can copy the command here and then paste it on the command line. Also, React Navigation requires a few more packages. So over here, if you are using an Expo project like I'm doing, you need to copy this command as well. Then we install it on the command line. Also, we will need some values from React Navigation elements. So we install that as well. So nps install at React Navigation elements. Like so. Ooh. Okay, I missed the expo part of the command. So we go back to the command and add expo to it. Yeah, like so. This should work now. Yeah, it's working. Okay, very nice. So with all the packages we need for this part installed, we can proceed to our files and directories. But before we proceed to the files and directories, we need to start the app once again and get it running on the device. So use nps expo start. Now we can run the app on the device once again, or we can bring up the context menu like so, and then just reload the app. This should also work as well. Okay. Now we can minimize our command line here and then proceed. Next up, we want to define some functions for storing and accessing data from our async storage. So for that, we'll create a new directory and call it utils, that's utilities. So over here, we'll create a new directory and we'll call this utils. And then we'll start with a storage file. So inside this directory, we'll create a file for storage. And in this file, we import the async storage. So we import async storage from React Native async storage, like so. The first function we'll create will be to store data. So we'll export the function and we'll call this store data. And this will be an async function. And inside this, we can open a try catch block. And for this function, if we catch any error, we want to throw it. So this will be thrown to the calling function. That is whichever function that will call this store data function. Now this store data function will take two properties, a key and a value. So we'll set those as the parameters of the function. So we'll have the key and then the value. Now, because async storage can only store strings, we have to convert the value that we are receiving to a string before we proceed to storing it. So we can do that with the help of JSON. So we'll have the string value. And then we'll use json.stringify. Then we can pass the value to it. Once we have our string value like so, we'll store it using the async storage. So we await async storage dot set item, and then this will take the key and then our string value. And that's all we need to do to store data. Now we'll do something very similar for retrieving or getting data. So let's copy and paste this. And this will be called get data. And this time around, if we are getting data, we only need the key. And then over here, the string value that we are getting will be from the async storage itself. So over here for the string value, you can copy the async storage command here. And then we'll paste it here. So this time around, we'll be calling the get item method. And then we'll pass just the key. Now after this, we'll return the value that we got. And because async storage is storing only strings, we'll be getting a string back. And then we have to use JSON to pass it back into the original state that we got it in. So if it's an object, we pass it back to an object. If it's an array, we pass it back to an array. So first of all, we'll check if the value that we got is not null. So we'll check string value is not equal to null. If the value is not null, then we go ahead to pass it. So json.pass, and then we pass the string value. Otherwise, if the value we got is null, guess what? We just return null. So that's all we need to do for the get data function as well. After getting the data from the async storage, to help us to use the data in our app easily, we're making use of context. So under utils, we'll create another file for context. So in this file, all our context that we'll be creating will reside here. So for now, we'll just import create context from React Native. So import it from React instead. We'll come here later on to create the context as and when we need them. Now at this point, let's create a few reusable components that we'll be using in the app. So for that, we'll create a new directory which we'll call components. So in the root directory, we'll create a new directory which we'll call components. Then over here, we'll start with the text component. So create another directory for the text. And then inside this text directory, we'll create a styled text file. In this file, we'll set up a basic component. So return just a fragment, and then we export this component as the default. Now for the style text, the main component we'll be using is the text from React Native. So we import text from React Native like so, and that'll be returned as the root element. And for the text, to display the children values that will be passed to it. So we can destructure that as parameters. And that will be passed to the text here. Now we want to go to the app.js file so that we can see the output of this component. But before we do that, inside the component, let's create another file which we'll call index.js. Now in this file, we import all the components that we'll create and export them again. Doing this will make it easier to import and use the components elsewhere without having to provide the whole path to the file. So over here, we'll start with the style text. So we import the style text and then we export it in an object. So now if we go to the app.js file, at the top we can import our style text. So we see that we are importing the style text from just the components, but we didn't have to enter the text directory and then before we get access to the style text. So now we can replace the text here with the style text. On my keyboard, I hit Ctrl D so that I can select both text at the same time. Then I can type styled text. Then I can change this text here to wind up. Good. Now let's go back to the style text and continue our work. Over here, we want to continue by adding some styles to the text and a few more properties that we want to receive. So for the text component here, we'll pass a style property. And for this component, we'll be using the style as an array. This is because we'll be having multiple styles. In this array, we'll start with an object. Here, we want to set a default color for our text. So for that, we need to bring in our colors that we defined earlier. So at the top, we import colors from the config theme file. So here, the color for our text will be colors.tint. We see that the color changes slightly. So this is the default color that we want for our text. Next, we want to define some font sizes. So how we are going to do this is that we'll be accepting a couple of properties. So depending on what is received, we set a particular size. That is, if we receive small, we set a small size for the text. If we receive big, we do that. Otherwise, we use a regular size for the text. So in addition to the children, we'll receive a small and also a big property like so. So for the font size, we'll first check if we receive the small property. So for the small property, we'll set the font size to 14. Otherwise, if we receive the big property, then we'll set the size to 20. If you receive neither of these two properties, then we'll set the default size to 16. Next, we want to adjust the font weight. And for this, we will receive a bold property. So for this property, if we receive the bold or the big text property, we want to set the font weight to bold. So we'll check if we receive bold or even the big property, then we'll set the value to bold. Otherwise, we'll stick with the normal font weight. Now, in addition to these default stylings, we can expect to receive some additional styles. So we'll take in the style property as well. And for this, we'll pass it as a second property of the array. And also any other property that is passed, we want to pass it to the text as well. So after the styling, we'll take in the props. This will capture any other property that is passed. And then after the style object, we'll pass it to the text. So this concludes the work for the style text. So back in the app.js file, we can test this quickly. So first of all, we can pass the small property. If we pass the small property, the size reduces. If we remove it, it returns back. Then if we pass the bold property, the text is boldened. And also if we pass the big property, the text will be enlarged and then boldened. So for now, let's pass the big property and keep it that way. Now let's create a button. So for that, inside the components directory, we'll create another directory for buttons. And then our button file will be called styled button. So over here, we create a component for the styled button. And then we'll return the fragment as we do. Now we export this as the default of the file. And then before we forget, let's do the export in the index file. So the index file under components, right here we import the styled button. And then we export it again. Now to be able to monitor what we are doing, let's go to the app.js file and then we import our button. So in addition to the style text here, we add the styled button. And then below this, I can display the start button, then pass checkout. Like so. Now we won't see anything here, obviously, because we've not done anything in the button yet. So let's go back to the button and continue our work. For the button, the outermost component to be using is a touchable opacity. So at the top, we import touchable opacity from React Native, like so. And in addition to this, we will need the style sheet for styling. So let's bring in the style sheet from React Native. So for the return, we return the touchable opacity, like so. Now for the content of the touchable opacity, we'll take in the children property and then display it using a text. So we'll take in the children property and then we'll bring in our style text. So we import the style text like so. And then over here, we render the children with the style text. Now we'll make a few more modifications over here, but let's start the touchable opacity first. So we'll do that in the style property. And for this as well, we're making use of an array. And the first style we receive will come from our style sheet. This will call styles.container. And then below this, we can create our style sheet. So create the styles. That'll be style sheet.create. Then our first style is the container. Now for this button, we start by giving it a height of 60. Also, we'll give it a width of 100%. Also, we justify the content to the center. Then align items to the center. In addition to this, we want to set a background color. So for that, we import our colors. So we import our colors from the config theme file. Then we set the background color to be colors.accents. But for this, we want it to be a lighter shade. So we add CC to lighten it a bit. Like so. Good. Now in addition to this, we'll set the border radius to 15 to give us a bit of rounded corners. Let's add a style for the text here. So we add another style for the text. And for this, all we'll do is to set the color to the primary color. So colors.primary. Then we can pass that to the text here. Now once again, we make use of an array here. So first we pass the styles.text. And that should have an effect on the text we have here. Now we also want to add a possibility to style the text of the button and also the button itself. So we add two more properties that we'll be receiving. So we expect to receive a style and also a text style. Now for the style, we'll pass it to the style of the touchable opacity. So we pass the style to it. And then for the text style, we pass it to the style of the text. Now for the text as well, we want it to be bold by default. So I can pass that as well. And it becomes bold. Remember that the style text accepts the bold property as we created earlier. Another thing we want to do is that we want to make it possible to display an icon in the button. So for that as well, we'll accept another property, which will be icon. And for this, we'll display it using an icon pack. For this button, we'll be using the Ant Design icon pack. So we can import that from Expo Vector Icons. So we import Ant Design from Expo Vector Icons. Now if you're using Expo, you don't have to install this. It already comes with the project. So once we have this, we can display the icon below the text. But we want to make a check to ensure that an icon is requested before we display the icon. So just in the touchable opacity here, we'll make a check for the icon. The first situation will be when the icon is not provided. So if the icon is not provided, in that case, we'll just return the style text. So we can copy this and then paste it here. Now the second situation will be when an icon is requested, meaning an icon name has been provided. So in that case, we check for the icon and then return a fragment. Now inside this fragment will be the text and the icon. So we can cut and paste this style text here. And then beneath the style text, we add the icon. So we are using the ant design icon pack here. Then first of all, we pass the name of the icon. And this will be the icon we received. We also give this icon a size of 19. And then we'll set a color. And that will be our primary color. So colors.primary. And then lastly, this will also take some styling. And it will be exactly the same as the text here. So we can copy the style of the text and then pass it to it. To see how this looks, let's go to the app.js file. And over here, we can pass an icon to the start button. So we can pass the icon of arrow right. And this should give us an icon. But this is not the look we are going for. So let's go back to the style button here. And then in the container style, we'll pass a flex direction. And we'll set the value to row. This should fix the look of the button. Now to give us some space between the text and the button, over here we'll concatenate the children with a white space, like so. That should give us some space between the text and the icon. Next, when the button is pressed, we want to display an activity indicator to show that something is happening in the background. So for that, before I forget, let's bring in the onPress property. And then we'll pass this onPress property to the touchable opacity. So we'll pass onPress and the value is onPress. And then let's bring in the activity indicator from React Native. So in addition to the style sheet, we'll bring in the activity indicator. Now to display the activity indicator, we'll take an extra property, and this one we'll call isLoading. So after onPress, we'll take in another property, isLoading. So for this as well, we'll make a check in the touchable opacity. So over here, we'll check if isLoading has been provided. And if that's the case, we'll return the activity indicator. For this activity indicator, we'll set a size of small. And then we'll set a color property as well. Now for the color, we'll first check whether a color has been passed to the text of the button via the text style property. So we'll check text style.color. Otherwise, then we'll fall back to our secondary color. So that'll be colors.secondary. Now let's terminate the activity indicator here, like so, and then close the bracket to get rid of the error. Now in the situation where isLoading is not provided or isLoading is false, that is when we want to return all the other values, the icon and the text. So over here, we'll check for the opposite of isLoading. So we'll check when isLoading is false. And then we'll return a fragment. Then let's cut the end of the fragment like so and paste it just before the last touchable opacity, like so. So with this done, if our button is loading, we'll return the activity indicator. If it's not loading, we'll return the text. But if an icon is also requested, we'll return the text and the icon. Now let's set up a text input component. So for this one as well, we'll go to our components directory and we'll create a new directory for inputs. And then we'll call this one styled text input. Inside this one as well, we'll create a new component for the styled text input. Before that, let's correct the name. So I'll rename this to styled text input. So for this, we'll create a component for the styled text input. And inside this will be the return. And then we export this function as the default. So we export default styled text input. And then inside the index file of the component, we import the styled text input. And then we export it here. Now to see what is happening, let's go to the app.js file and import our styled text input. So we import that, and just below the styled button, we can render our styled text input. For now, we'll not pass any properties, but we'll come back and pass a few properties. Back in the styled text input, we need a few components from React Native. So we import the view and also text input and also style sheets, all from React Native. Now the very first component to return will be the view. That will contain everything in our style text input. Our input will have an icon on the left and the actual input on the right. So for the icon, we will need an icon pack. And once again, we'll make use of the ant design. So we import ant design from Expo vector icons. For the icon, it will be in another view. And inside this view will be the icon. So we have ant design. And then beneath this view will be the text input. So we'll have the text input. Now we'll add some initial styling, starting with the view of the icon. So for this one, we'll pass a style, and then the style will be in the style sheet. So that will be styles dot left icon, because this is the icon we'll be putting on the left. Then for the icon itself, first of all, it will receive the icon name as a property. So that will come from the props. And also we'll set a color. We'll set it to our colors.placeholder. In addition to that, we'll give it a size of 30. Now for the input itself, we'll also give it some styling. This time around, it will be an array. And the first entry, which will come from our style sheet, we call styles.input field. And beneath the component, we create our style sheet. So styles, we go to the style sheet, let's create. Now it's saying colors cannot be found. So we import our colors. So make the import of the colors from the config theme file. So over here, starting with the input field, we start by giving it a height of 50. And also the font size of the text, we want to set it to 16. Now to appreciate what is happening here, let's go to the app file and pass a few properties. So first, let's pass a placeholder. And we'll set this to have a value of start typing. Also want to pass an icon. This will have a value of search one. Now we can see the icon over here, but the placeholder is yet to show. So back in the style text input, We'll capture all the remaining properties into the props. And then we pass it to the text input here. And now we should see the placeholder. Now continuing our styling, we'll set a color for the input field. And that will be colors.tint. Also want to set a padding at the left. And that will be 55. We are adding that padding so that to accommodate the icon. Also, we'll set a padding to the right. And that will be just 15. And also we'll give this a border radius of 10. The border radius will be clear when we set the background color in a bit. Next, we want to style the left icon. For this icon, we'll set the left property to 15 pixels. Also, we'll give it a top property of 10. And also we'll give it a Z index of 1. And then a position of absolute. Now this shouldn't be looking like this. So let's refresh the app and see whether it fixes it. So I can open my context menu and then hit reload. And hopefully it will be gone by the time it comes back. Yeah. It's gone. Yeah, it's gone. Good. Now back to the text input component. We want to set a color for the placeholder text here. So we'll do that via the placeholder text color property. And for the value, we'll set it to colors.placeholder. And that should make it faint a bit. Now when the input field is in focus like so, we want to change the styling. So for this particular input, we'll be changing the background color based on whether it's in focus or not. So to help us do this, we'll define two functions here. We will use these two functions to override the onBlur and onFocus functions of the text input. So first of all, let's define one for onFocus. So we'll call this one custom onFocus. And inside this function, we'll first call any other onFocus function that the input may have received. So to do that, we'll access the props.onFocus. Then after, we do what we want to do. And in this case, we want to change the background color. So to help us do this, we'll create a state variable. So we'll bring in the useState hook from React. So at the top, we can import the useState hook from React like so. And inside the component, we'll create a state which we'll call active background color. And then a set active background color. Now for this, the initial value will be an empty string like so. Then once the input is in focus, we'll call set active background color. And we'll set the color to the highlight color. So colors.highlight. And the custom onBlur will be similar to this. So we can copy and paste it. And then we can rename this one to custom onBlur. Now inside this function, instead of onFocus, we'll call onBlur. And for the background color, we'll set it back to an empty string. Now to the input here, we'll pass the functions we just defined. So first we'll pass onFocus, and then we'll pass custom onFocus. And then to the onBlur, that one will be custom onBlur. Now to make the background color take effect, we'll make some changes in the style here. So over here, we open another style object. And then we call the background color property. Now for this, we'll first check if the active background color has a value. So if the active background color has a value, that is when the input has been focused, we'll make use of that. So active background color. Otherwise, it will set a default color. And in this case, we'll be using a secondary color. So colors.secondary. With this done, if we focus on the input, we see that the background color changes. And if we show the context menu to get rid of the focus, we see that the background color has changed back to the original one. Now, in addition to these styles that we've defined, we can expect to receive additional styles. So that one will be through the style property. So after the icon, we bring in the style property, then we pass this as another value to the styles array. Now that sums up the work for the style text input. Now let's create a couple of container components. So inside the components directory, we'll add another directory for containers. And the first container I'll be creating we'll call main container. So over here, we'll create the container component. So this we call main container. And inside will be our return. And then we export this as the default. Main container. Then once again, inside the index file of the components directory, we import the main container and then export it once again. Now back in the main container, we need two components from React Native. So bring in the view and then the keyboard avoiding view. And this will all be from React Native. The first component to return will be the view. And inside this we'll have the keyboard avoiding view. Now since it's a container, it will obviously take the children property because it will be wrapping some content. And all these children will go to the keyboard avoiding view. Now for some initial styling, we'll pass a style to the view. And this will take an array. Then we'll define some initial styles. First of all, we'll give it a flex of 1. And also we'll set a background color. So for this, we need to bring in our colors from the theme file. So import colors from config theme. And for this, we'll set the background color to colors.primary. In addition to this, if we get any additional styles externally, we'll do that through the style property. Then we'll pass it as a second value of the array. Now for any other property that will be passed, we'll accept it into the props here and still pass it to the view. So after the style, we'll spread the props onto the view like so. Now for the keyboard avoiding view, first we'll set a behavior property. Now for the value of this behavior property, we want to base it on whether we are on iOS or on Android. So let's bring in the on iOS constant that we declared. So we import on iOS from config/constants. That's the constant file. So over here, we change this to an object. Then first check whether we are on iOS. So if that is true, we set the value to padding. Otherwise, we leave the value as blank. Now we are doing this to ensure that the keyboard doesn't cover the content when you have an input field on the page. After this will also take a style property And all we'll do is to set the flex to 1. And then lastly, we have to set a keyboard vertical offset. Now this value here refers to the distance between the top of the user's device and where the content on the page starts. So usually between the user's contents and the top of the device is the header of the page. So for this value, we have to get the height of the header and pass it to it. So to do that, we'll bring in the header height context from React Native Elements. Remember, we installed that. So we import header height context from React Navigation Elements, like so. Now to be able to use the context value, we need to bring in use context from React. So we import the use context from React, like so. Then over here in the keyboard vertical offset, we call use context and we pass header height context, like so. In the case nothing is provided here, we want to set the value to 0. Now the second container component is a scrollable one. So for that one, we'll create a new file and we'll call scrollable main container. Now this will be quite similar to the main container, so we can copy all the content here and then paste it in the scrollable main container file. Then we change the name here. I hit Ctrl D to select them both, and then at the start I add scrollable. Now for this, before we forget, let's go to the index file here and add it to the exports. So we bring in scrollable main container, and then we also export scrollable main container. Now over here, since we are scrolling, we will need the scroll view from React Native. So bring in scroll view from React Native. And this will be nested inside the keyboard avoiding view. So we have the scroll view here, and that will rather wrap the children property. Now we copy the whole style object of the view and pass it to the scroll view. In addition, we set shows vertical scroll indicator to false. This will make sure that we don't see any vertical scroll bar when we are using this component. Also, we'll set a content container style. And for this value, we expect to receive it as a property. So that will be coming from the props. And then that will be the value as well. This will style the content of the scroll view whenever it's provided. Lastly, any other props that we receive, just like the view, we'll pass it here. And then we don't need the view here, so we can get rid of it. And same for the closing tag. And also we get rid of the view from the imports as well. That should conclude the work for the containers. Now let's do a basic navigation setup that we'll build on in a bit. So over here, inside the root directory of the project, we'll create a new directory and call it screens. This will house all the screens that we'll be having in the app. First of all, let's start with just the home screen. And over here, we can just display home for the time being. So to help us do that, let's copy the content of the app.js. So we copy everything here and paste it in the home. And then we can get rid of the input and the button, and also the status bar. And also we can get rid of all the unused imports. So we get rid of the input and the start button as well. Now for the screens directory as well, we'll create an index file. And in this file, we import the home component. And then we export it in an object. Now in the app.js file, we'll bring in the navigation container. That will be the main container for our app, which will enable navigation from one page to the other. So we import navigation container. So import navigation container from React Navigation Native. Now wrap all the content of the app with the navigation container. So we'll have the navigation container here, like so, wrapping everything. Over here, all that will keep is a status bar. And we can get rid of everything else. And also, since we want to see the content of our home screen, we can import the home screen from the screens. And then before the status bar, we return the home. Now it seems you have a problem in the home screen. So back in the home screen, the issue is with the style text. So we need to go back a directory before we can have access to the components. So once we do that, we see the content of our home screen. Now back in the app file, we can get rid of the unused import like so. And also the styles here is not used, so we can get rid of it. That means also getting rid of the style sheet. Now the last thing we want to do is to enable the app to fetch all the data that it needs before it starts. And we'll do that by keeping the splash screen on the screen until the data fetch is complete. So for this, inside our app.js file, we import the splash screen component that we installed. So over here, we import everything as the splash screen from Expo splash screen. Now once we have this, the first thing we'll do is to prevent the splash screen from hiding. So to do that, we'll call splash screen dot prevent auto hide async like so, and then we'll call the function. Now once we do this, it will keep the splash screen on the screen. So to see this in action, we can refresh the app. So I'll bring up the context menu and then I'll hit reload. Now we see that even though the app is ready, the splash screen is still on the screen. So how we can fix this is to create another function. And we'll call this prepare app. And this function will do all we need to do to prepare the app and get it ready. So we can make this an async function. And in this, we'll open a try catch block. For the catch block, we'll just console.warn. Now for this function, inside the try block, we'll do all the data fetching we need to do. So fetch all the needed data. And inside the catch block, if there is any error, we will be warned. And then we'll have a finally block as well. Now in this block, we'll hide the splash screen. That is when all the data fetch is complete. So over here, we'll call splash screen dot hide async. With this done, we need to call the prepare app function, and we'll do so by the help of the useEffect hook. So at the top, we import useEffect from React like so. And then beneath the prepare app, we'll call the useEffect hook, pass a function to it, and also pass an empty array. And inside this function, we'll call prepare app. So once we do that, we have the content of our home screen back again. Now this concludes the setup we need for the other aspects of the app. Link to what we've done in this part will be in the description below, so you can check it out.